Hello, everybody that's joining us. Welcome to today's live event. It's the 19th of October and it's 2:30. So welcome one and all. I hope you're really well. So today we are meeting the author Mike Gayle and learning all about his journey as well as his creative process. And we will also have a reading from his latest book. So before we go into the detail of the event, I'm just going to remind everybody around some of the tech guidance. So if this is your first time watching our live events, hello, welcome. My name is Lucy Tomlinson, a resident experience manager here at Barchester, and myself and a team of people here at Barchester Healthcare provide these events as part of our regular entertainment and activities program. So welcome to everyone. Now, I can see we have about 73 people watching our accounts on Zoom, and we have about 19 on YouTube currently, which is great. So welcome one and all. Now, do remember this event is streamed through a Zoom webinar, but it's also available on YouTube. So let me just run through a couple of points to remind you guys on. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to let us know you're there by writing in the comments and saying hi and give your home name. And many of you have already, which is great. But if you are watching on YouTube, make sure that you tell us that you're watching. And if you're watching on Zoom, and many of you already say hi, which is great, you can rename yourself to be your home name if you prefer. And if you have any technical questions on Zoom, we have another Lucy in the background to support. So make sure to direct any messages to the host if you need to. Me too. And finally, however you're watching today, whether that's Zoom or YouTube, you are invited to ask any questions to Mike. We have a Q&A with him already, but we are open to your questions and your comments as we go through this live event. So make sure to write them in the comments on YouTube and in the chat on Zoom as well. So that's all the things I want to run through with you. I hope you're all having a great day so far. And to host this event, I'm going to hand over to Fiona Hardman, who will be joining us right now. Here's Fiona, who is our PR manager, and she's going to introduce our special guest. So I will hand over to you, Fiona, and Mike will join us shortly.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Lucy. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I hope you're all really well. I'm Fiona Hardman. I'm the PR manager here at Barchester, and I'm absolutely delighted that with us today we have best-selling author Mike Gayle. And Mike is with us to talk about his creative process, how he comes up with his fantastic ideas for his novels, and to talk us through all things to do with creative writing. So if you are a budding novelist, please get your questions into the chat, and then Mike will be really happy to share with you all his expertise. So Mike was born and raised in Birmingham, and he graduated from Salford University with a degree in sociology and then made his way down to London, where he started off his career as a journalist. He was a features writer, features editor, and also an agony uncle. So that's quite interesting. So Mike used to be an agony uncle for some teenage magazines. I'm sure he'll tell us all about that. And then in, I think it was 97, Mike published his first novel, which is called My Legendary Girlfriend. And at that point, he decided to become a full-time novelist. And since then, he has written 16 novels. And he's going to do a reading for us from his latest novel, which is called All the Lonely People. So first of all, we'll do some Q&A. I will ask Mike some questions. Obviously, you feed your questions into the chat function. He'll do his reading, and then we'll get to your questions at the end. Right, Mike, welcome. It's wonderful to have you with us today.
Hello, thank you very much for having me on. Thank you.
Right, so when did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
I think wanting to be a writer came from just a love of reading. Ever since I can remember, I've always loved books. And I remember the first time that I was, someone explained the concept of libraries to me as a very small child. And I just couldn't believe that you could go and get free books. And so I was there every Saturday, every Saturday morning, I'd be there getting my books. And I think the first time I thought to myself, this is what I want to do for a job, was when I read the Just Riddling books by Richard Crompton. I remember reading, even though there was like there was quite a disconnect, he was a kind of a schoolboy from the kind of, I think, 1930s, 1940s, and I was in Birmingham in the 1970s. I felt a real connection with William, and I remember just really enjoying those books. And my dad had a typewriter, and like an old kind of fashioned typewriter. And so I remember thinking, right, I'm going to write my own book. And I was only 8 at the time, and so I think I probably spent about an hour working on the first sentence, and then I spent the rest of the afternoon working on the cover because, you know, I was only 8. But that was the first time that I thought to myself, this is a world that I want to be part of. And then I think moving on from there, I think that the next time that I thought to myself, this is what I wanted to do, was when I did A-level English. And I remember being told what books we were doing, and one of them was Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights, and we were doing Wuthering Heights, and we were doing Tessa de D'Urbervilles. And I remember first homework was, you know, we had to read the first couple of chapters of Tessa de D'Urbervilles. And I remember thinking, oh, I don't really want to do this. Oh, why am I doing A-level English? And I started reading Tessa de D'Urbervilles and just thought, oh, you know. And then I got really into it, and I just couldn't believe it. I just thought, oh, this is amazing. Oh, this is fantastic. Oh, Tess, what are you doing? Oh, Alec d'Urberville, he's evil. Oh, Angel Clare is also evil. And it was amazing. And I remember just thinking to myself, wow, I can't believe that somebody can make me feel all these different emotions just through the written word. And so, yeah, I suppose at the back of my mind, it was always percolating that I wanted to make a living from words. And so, you know, that was, I suppose, where that kind of the seed was planted.
And yet you started off as a journalist. What made you go down that road?
Well, I suppose it was, for me, it was a love of words. So I kind of thought, in a kind of practical sense, I'll go into journalism. So while I was at university, I wrote for a listings magazine in Manchester, and then I wrote for one in Birmingham after I graduated. And so I moved down to London to do a journalism course. And while I was there, I think everybody on my course wanted to kind of write for the Guardian or the Telegraph, and you know, and I have written for those papers. But what I really wanted to write for was I wanted to write for smash hits. That was my all-time ambition because I grew up reading smash hits, and through a quirk of fate, I actually ended up working for a magazine called Take That Official Magazine, which is all about Take That. And from there, I went freelance, and a magazine called Bliss had just launched, and I started working for them. And they one day I was in the office, and they said, "Oh, we need an agony uncle. Would you like to have a go?" And so I wrote a few sample questions and answers, and sent it into the editor. She loved them, and she gave me the job. And so I had a column called Dear Mike, and teenage girls would write to me with their problems, and I would try my very best to solve them.
Well, that sounds like brilliant fun.
It was really good fun, and it was really lovely. I always remember one girl who wrote in and said to me, wrote a letter to me saying that I was her favourite part of the magazine, and that she would always turn to me straight away and read my column. And she said that she'd made a conscious decision only to go out with boys who looked like me, which I thought was very lovely of her. So yes, we had all sorts of fun there. And then from there, I went to Just 17 as features editor, and that was again really good fun, interviewing pop bands and doing all sorts of writing all sorts of funny articles as well. But all the time, I suppose, I was aware that that while I was having fun, it wasn't the sort of writing that I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing. It was loads of good fun, but I knew that I still wanted to be an author.
And how did it come about with your first book deal? Did you start writing first? You know, how does that work? How do you go about finding a deal?
Well, it was interesting. I'd actually, so I had moved to London, And because I was doing my journalism course, I had a lot of free time. And I just thought to myself, I'm going to write a novel. And so I just picked it up I just started one day. I had an idea about what I wanted to write about. I started writing this novel. And I just sort of would write it and pick it up and put it down, and write it and pick it up and put it down. And in the end, I wrote about, in the first instance, I wrote about 30,000 words, pardon me. And then my career took off. And so it ended up going in a drawer. And I sort of never forgot about it. And so when I was doing all these different things, and I was thinking about, okay, next steps, it occurred to me that I'd still had this novel. And so I went freelance. And so to just kind of keep the money rolling in. And so I went freelance. And in my spare time, when I wasn't doing journalism, I was working on this novel. And it took me about a year, door to door. And one of the things I always tell people who want to be writers is, you've got to be really kind to yourself, and being part of being kind to yourself is actually giving yourself permission to be a little bit rubbish, and actually turning off that inner critic almost. Because, I would say that 90% of the hard work of writing a novel is actually just getting the words down. And so essentially, I just turned off my inner critic. I wrote for a year. I didn't even reread things to begin with. And when I got to the end, I remember typing the end, and I remember thinking of being really proud of myself. I thought to myself, and when I read it back, I just thought, actually, this isn't brilliant. It's got characters changing names in the middle of a sentence. It's got plot holes that you could drive a lorry through. But what it was a story with the beginning, middle, and an end. And it was something that I could make better. Because all the effort, all the next effort of writing a book is actually rewriting. Nobody, all the books that we read, you don't just sit down and just write and it's perfect from the get-go. As you're writing, as you're rewriting, you make it better. And it's so much easier to rewrite something when you've got something already down. And so I ended up rewriting the first draft, and I ended up I probably rewrote it probably about 12 times in total, but each time it just got better and better and better and better. And I sort of felt I knew more of what was going on. And then the next stage was I gave it to some friends to read, and lots of people read it and gave me some feedback. And the thing about feedback is feedback can be useful, but I think you also have to be really sure of yourself at the same time. So you have to know, I think you have to listen to, okay, so if enough people say, I'm not quite sure what happened on page 123, it just means that it doesn't mean that you have to take out page 123. It might mean that you haven't explained yourself properly, or that it needs a bit more work, or it could actually mean that it needs to go. But ultimately, that is your decision. You've got to decide what is best for your story. And so I got the book to the best I thought I could get it. I sent it out to an agent, or to some agents. And so I didn't really know anything about the world of publishing. But I'd heard about this book called the Artist and Writers Yearbook, which lots of libraries can get it from Amazon and all sorts of places. And it's just a big list of all the different sorts of literary agents in the UK. And I just picked out a few names that I'd heard of, from reading newspaper articles and magazine articles. And I sent them, they tended to ask for the first 3 chapters and a covering letter. And so I sent those out, and then I waited. So I sent out 3 lots of 3 chapters to 3 different agencies, and sort of sat there with my fingers crossed and waited and waited and waited. And eventually, one day I got a letter through the post. I tore it open because I saw that it was from a literary agent. It said, "Dear Mr. Gayle, thank you very much for sending us your submission. My legendary girlfriend. Unfortunately, this is not the sort of novel we feel we can publish, but all the best with your career." And I was absolutely heartbroken. but again, it's sort of a lesson learned, really, that many overnight sensations actually are over year sensations or over many year sensations. There's a lot of hard work that goes on in the background, and it doesn't always happen straight away. But I refused to kind of be put off. And so eventually I got a letter from somebody who liked what I was doing. And I met up with them, and we talked about the manuscript, and she gave me a few ideas. And I worked on a new draft and sent it to her, and she loved it. And so she took me on as a client. And so I finally had an agent. And an agent basically is somebody who works on your behalf to try and get you a book deal. And so we worked on it over the summer of '96, I think it was. And she would just kind of give me a few tips and, maybe make this longer, make this shorter, more of this, less of that. And eventually we sent it out to, she sent it out to 7 publishers. When she felt it was as good as it could get, she sent it out to 7 publishers on a Friday, as I remember. And by the Monday morning, we had 2 offers on the table. And so it went to what's called an auction. And so we had basically 2 publishers bidding against each other, vying for the right to publish the book. And fortunately, it not only went to my publishers, Hodder and Stoughton, who I've been with now for 24 years, but it not only went to the people who paid the most money for it, but also who got what I was trying to do with my book. So that's how I became an author.
Brilliant. Oh, it's so fascinating to hear how it all came about. So where do you get your ideas from? How do you know when you've got an idea that's going to go somewhere?
I think that's it. I mean, there are lots of ideas, but the big question is it an idea that I can really, that I think's got legs, that I think I can work on for, from Monday to Friday for an entire year? It's a really big commitment, and it's quite hard to know that at the very beginning. And so with lots of my books, I tend to start with something that I'm interested in. So it might be a subject that I feel, okay, there's something interesting here. And so let's pursue that. And so I might think around the subject, think about who the characters might be, think about what might happen. I'm very much a planner. So I never used to be a planner, but I'm very much a planner now. And so I will think around that. And once I've thought around the idea and what the initial premise of the book might be, I will actually think, okay, well, what's the beginning, middle, and end for this book? So I'll break it down, and then I'll think to myself, okay, once I've broken that down and I can sort of see the shape of it, I'll then think to myself, okay, what will happen in the very beginning? What will happen in the next chapter? And I'll actually break it down chapter and chapter and almost tell myself the story in short form, just so that I can go, okay, in this chapter, this will happen. In this chapter, this will happen. And gradually, I'm just building up this picture of this story. So actually, these days, before I actually write a single word of the actual story itself of the novel, I actually know what will happen in every chapter, and also in the beginning, middle, and end. So I am like that. But equally, I've got lots of friends who are authors who they just sit down, they've got a gut feeling, and they just go, I'm just going to write this book, and they go and write, and they just write on the hoof, and they get a lot of energy from that. And yeah, so it's sort of, you've got to do what works for you, I think. But that's the thing that works for me.
So do you go and sort of shut yourself away and work on your own, or is it more of a collaborative process?
I tend to work on my own. When I first got the opportunity to be a full-time author, I tried to treat it very much like a 9-to-5 job. And so I remember sitting down at 8 o'clock in the morning and working really hard for an hour, and then making myself a cup of tea, and then working really hard for another hour, and then making another cup of tea, and then working for 10 minutes, and then making myself another cup of tea. I don't even like tea. But what I realized is that writing is quite an intense thing to do. And you can't, certainly for me, I can't treat it like it's quite a hard thing to do all day. And so, and you end up just getting distracted. So you might sit down in your seat, but you're not actually doing a great deal of writing. So over time, I've kind of learned that I'm very much a morning person. And so I will write from 8 until about midday, maybe 1 o'clock. And then I will stop and I will do something completely different. And that way, I feel like when I sit down the next day, I'm always excited about sitting down back in the desk. But a friend of mine, Jenny Colgan, she gives a really brilliant piece of advice for people who want to write. She says that if you really want to write a novel, and it's just about committing the time. And she said that if you start writing every time you hear the theme tune to EastEnders, and if you stop writing every time you hear the doo, 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 and if you do the same for the Sunday Omnibus, within a year you'll have a novel. And it's true. It's about little and often. Just keep going, keep bit by bit, you build up, and eventually you'll find yourself typing the end, and it's a really amazing experience. So I definitely recommend it.
Are there some days when it just isn't happening?
Yes, there are, yes. And sometimes it's not so much of writing. What's interesting is everybody thinks about writing being just writing, but actually a lot of writing, I've learned the hard way that actually a lot of writing comes from good thinking, and you have to give yourself space to think. So, you've got your characters. Sometimes, it's not just about words on papers, but it's about thinking about the situation, thinking about, okay, what do these characters want and what's stopping them from getting it? And sometimes when I'm walking the dog, I'll think to myself, all right, I need a break. I'm doing this. I'll take the dog for a walk. And by the time I've come back, having done something else and looked at, sky, flowers, all the rest of it, I'll come back and I'll suddenly, out of nowhere, I'll have the solution to the problem that I've been faced with. And sometimes you do need to give yourself a break. You need to kind of be very kind to yourself, because it's a marathon, not a sprint.
And your characters, how much are they from your life? How much do you take from people that you know, or what are your influences there?
It's a funny question there. I think everybody normally assumes that you're just writing your own autobiography, and so
not when you get to book number 16, surely.
Well, exactly. This is it. You see, everybody thinks you're just minding your own life, and actually, I would that my life were that exciting. My life is very dull. I like it that way. So all of my kind of characters are, I suppose they tend to be born out of the situation in the book. And so, if I've got somebody who is quite afraid of the world, then the thing to do with them is put them in a situation where they have to do things that they're scared of. If you've got somebody who thinks that the way to happiness is along one route, then you need to put them in a situation where they're exposed to things that they wouldn't normally be exposed to. And when you're thinking about characters, you're thinking about who is the person, who is the character that will learn most from this sort of story in this situation. And so they tend to grow like that. And then you might sort of flesh them out with things that you've experienced, or things that or people that you know. But quite so often, things just kind of pop out of my imagination. And yes, yeah, I'm sure there are. I'm not quite sure where all these things kind of come from, but sometimes it does really feel like the characters kind of, once you've built this situation for them, they do start to kind of form themselves. And yeah, and the longer you spend with them, the more you get to know them. So when you first start, you meet a new character and you start writing about a new character. It can be quite difficult because you're not really sure who they are, what they want, where they're going. But by the time you get to the end, you know absolutely who they are and what they want and where they're going. And so you can actually find yourself in a situation where you want your character to do this, and then actually you realize, actually, no, they wouldn't do that. Even though that's what I planned for them to do, they are actually that sort of person in this sort of situation is going to do this. And so it's very much about psychology, I suppose, as well as writing.
And do you write sort of one book at a time? Do you have another one?
Yeah,
do you write
one
down
book at a time
ideas?
is more than enough. Thank you.
If some ideas came to you, do you kind of like make a note or?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things I noticed very early on in my career was that it used to happen like clockwork. 6 months into a book, I would get the most blinding idea for my next book. And I just think to myself, wow, that's amazing. And it used to happen always like clockwork. 6 months into a new book, it would always happen. And it took me a little while to realize that actually it's just a form of procrastination. It's just your brain saying, this is really hard. You fancy giving up? Here's a brand new idea, a brand new shiny idea. Let's forget this one that's hard and let's do this new thing. And then as soon as I realized that, it stopped happening. So now when I get to the end of the book, I feel like, okay, that's it. But I literally have no idea what the next book's going to be about.
And how long of a gap do you have between your novels? Do you give yourself some time off?
I do give myself some time off, but the funny thing is that it's a very intense process. And so when I'm getting towards the end of the book, I always feel like, right, I dream of taking a month off and doing something completely different that's not sitting in front of a computer screen, going out, seeing some of the world, seeing friends, doing all those things. And then I do that for about a week and a half, and then suddenly I'm just like, oh, I really want to get back to my computer. It's just the way I do. Really, it's a job I was born to do, and I do really love it. I really enjoy it.
Which is your favourite novel of the ones you've written?
It's a really difficult question to answer because it's a little bit like saying which of your children is your favourite. Clearly, it's the youngest. No, it's not. No, I can't say that. It's not. I love them both equally, and it's the same with books. You love them all for different things, for different reasons. I suppose if I had to narrow it down, I'd always say the first book because it was the book that started off my career, and so for that I'm always really grateful. And the latest book because you have to really love the book that you're working on to actually commit that much time and energy and efforts into doing it. So yeah, that's my answer.
And what would you say to someone who thinks they've got a novel in them? What would your words of wisdom be?
My words of wisdom would be get it down. I meet a lot of people who want to write novels, and I always say, have you written anything? And they always go, oh no. And I always think to myself, that's probably where you're going wrong. There are a lot of wonderful novels in people's heads, but publishers can't publish anything unless it's actually down on paper. So the thing to do is to sit down and do it. And as I said earlier, I think the key thing is to just be kind to yourself. It's very easy to kind of start writing and just think, oh, this is terrible. I'm rubbish. I'm not very good at doing this. But actually, that's how I feel. And I've been doing it for over 20 years. The thing to do is to turn off your inner critic, is to be really kind to yourself. Just say, look, I'm going to enjoy this. And to write the thing that you want to write, really enjoy telling that story and finish it. That's another thing that lots of people I've met lots of people who start books, they never finish them. But the thing to do is actually, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to finish this book. Because once you've finished the book, you suddenly, it's just like, wow, I've written a book. And the impetus to actually get it really good becomes that much stronger. And you can improve on something when it's there and it's fully formed and you've got all your ideas down, and you can make it better. And that's the really exciting thing to do. And so I just say have a go. That's the first one. Be kind to yourself and don't stop until it's ended. Don't worry, keep going on forever.
Well, I can see that we've got loads of questions coming in, which is fantastic. Everybody, please keep your questions coming in. I think should we do our reading now, Mike? Would you like to read to us?
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to tell you. So the book's called All the Lonely People, and it's about an 84-year-old pensioner called Hubert Bird. And Hubert Bird is originally from the West Indies, but he lives in London. And he has a daughter, and his daughter lives in Australia. And he's a widower. And every week, his daughter will call him and ask how he's doing, what he's been up to. And Hubert paints the perfect picture of the perfect retirement. It's full of friends. He's always going out places, always doing amazing things. But the truth is, Hubert is lying. And the truth is, he's actually very lonely. And so when we meet him, so I'm going to read the opening chapter when we very first meet him. Moments before Hubert met Ashley for the first time, he'd been settled in his favourite armchair, puss curled up on his lap, waiting for Rose to call. When the doorbell rang, he gave a touch of annoyance, wagering it was one of those damn courier people who were always trying to make him take in parcels for his neighbours. Would you mind accepting this for number 63, they would ask. Yes, me mind a great deal, he would snap. Now clear off. And he would slam the door shut in their faces. As he shifted Puss from his lap and stood up to answer the door, Hubert muttered angrily to himself. Parcels, all day, every day, for people who are never in to receive the damn things. If people want them things so much, why don't they buy them for the shop like everybody else? With words of scathing condemnation loaded and ready to fire, Hubert unlocked the front door and flung it open, only to discover that the person before him wasn't anything like he'd been expecting. Sorry. Instead of a uniform parcel courier, there stood a young woman with short dyed blonde hair. In a nod towards the recent spell of unseasonably warm April weather, she was wearing a pink vest top, cut-off jeans, and pink flip-flops. Holding a hand was a small child, a girl with blonde hair, also wearing a pink top, shorts, and pink flip-flops. The young woman smiled. Hi there, I'm not disturbing you, am I? She's Welsh, by the way. That was me doing a Welsh accent. Hubert said nothing, but made a mental note that should he need to contact the police, he would tell them that the woman spoke with a funny accent. To his untrained ear, it sounded Welsh or possibly Irish, though he couldn't be entirely sure it was either. She held up her hand as if in surrender. It's okay. I'm not trying to sell you anything or nothing. I just came round to say hello, really. We just moved in next door. She pointed in the direction of the block of low-rise flats adjacent to Hubert's property. We're new to the area and we not know a single soul. Anyway, this morning I was saying to myself, Ash, you're never going to get to know anyone around here unless you start talking to people. So I called round to see the couple in the flat below, but I think they must have been out at work. Sorry, my Welsh accent's disappearing. Then I tried the family across the hallway, but they didn't open the door, even though I could hear the TV blaring away. So then I tried all the other flats and got nothing. All out or busy, I suppose. So I got Layla ready and took her to try it. I got Layla ready and took her to try the mother and toddler group at the library, but it's just closed because of funding problems, apparently. She paused, looking at him expectantly, perhaps hoping for a smile or a nod of comprehension. But Hubert remained impassive. The young woman cleared her throat self-consciously, but then continued, My name's Ash. Well, it's Ashley, really, but everyone calls me Ash. And this madam here, she glanced down at the small child, is my daughter Layla. The little girl covered her eyes with both her hands, but peeked up at Hubert through the cracks between her fingers. Layla, said Ashley, her voice warm with encouragement, say hello to our lovely new neighbour, Mr. Ashley looked at him expectantly. Ashley looked at him expectantly, but Hubert continued to say nothing. I think she's a bit shy, said Ash, returning to attention to Layla. You won't believe it to look at her, but I used to be dead shy too when I was a kid. Wouldn't say a boo to a goose. She smiled hopefully at Hubert. I'm going on, aren't I? I do that. I think it's nerves. It's a situation that I just start talking. In new situations, I just start talking and I can't stop. Anyway, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that it's nice to be labelled, isn't it? And this is me being exactly that. I think I'll stop there, but that's the opening part of the opening chapter to All the Lonely People.
Thank you very much, Mike. That was great. So I think we've got some questions in the chat now.
Okay.
Right, let's have a look. Lucy T, have you been looking at them?
I have indeed, and thank you for that reading, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've had some comments as well. I'll start with Tam Brown. I don't know what home you are, Tam, but I can see the name. But if you want to tell us which home, that'd be great. Do your favourite books, and I know you said you don't have any, sell the most?
That's a good question. Because they're all my favourites. It's hard to say. I suppose the one that sold the most was I wrote a book called I wrote a book called Turning 30 back in 2000, and that went on to sell probably about 4,000 copies. 400,000 copies. There's quite a difference between the two. So that's probably my best-selling novel. But to me, it's not really about as much as I like the. I think I like my favorite books are the ones that I sort of feel closest to, and the ones that I really feel like I'm emotionally invested in the kind of characters, and I suppose that's all of them really. And yeah, I mean, sales is an interesting one because books that I think are, my best books. It's hard to say because they're all your sort of favourites. So it's nice, I suppose. It's nice to get recognition. It's nice when lots of people say, yes, we want to buy this book. But equally, I still love, I love the ones that maybe haven't sold quite as much as well. It's, I suppose the end point for me is about telling a story that I feel I've told it well, and I feel that it's told some sort of truth. And there's nothing more satisfying than sort of getting a letter from a reader saying that, they've really connected with one of your stories. And the truth is that has happened with every single one of the books that I read. And so that to me is a job well done, that somebody somewhere has really connected to the story. So that's my job done, I think.
Brilliant. Tam from Newington Court, she's put that in, so thank you very much for that question. We've had a couple of questions that are sort of similar. Angela, how long does it take to write a book? And Lyndham House, I think is Kelly, how long does a novel take to write? So estimated maybe?
Well, it's interesting. Again, it's a bit like how long is a piece of string, because I know of authors who have written books in 3 months from beginning to end, and they've been really good books. Equally, I've known of authors who can take up to 10 years to write a book. I mean, Ralph Ellison wrote one book and never wrote another book again. So we're at two different spectrums. For me, it takes probably about a year, and that's with me working 8 till 1 every day. Also, I've got a young family as well, so it's sort of having a life balance. I can get a book done in a year, and yeah, I think, like I said about the EastEnders thing, I think that's very true. I think you can definitely get a first draft done within a year if you write every day, or even write regularly.
Yeah, definitely. So anybody watching that's interested, you've got a year, guys. So get to it, get started. Alicia, oh, I can't quite see which home that is, but I remember reading your part in Bliss magazine when I was younger. That's the activities coordinator. FYI on that one. Also a comment from Ashcombe House, who was just checking, and you did go in to describe it, but your first book, My Legendary Girlfriend, they read it and loved it. So that's Ashcombe House.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's very kind.
I can see one from Lindham House that says, sorry, did I cut you off there, Mike?
No.
Do you get emotional when finishing your novel?
I think I do, actually, because the thing is, you spend all day, every day with these people, and you put them through all sorts of very difficult situations. And when there's a point where you kind of realize that you're going to actually say goodbye to them, and it can be quite an emotional thing, because you've seen them grow into the people that they've become. And yeah, you get to the end, and you can feel a little bit bereft. And so when you're starting with a new book and with new characters, you can feel a little bit like, oh, who are these people? You're not these people who I just spent a year with. You're a bunch of, I don't know anything about them. And then they too, gradually over time, they become your friends as well. So yeah, and I think you also feel for people, you feel for the characters when they are in difficult situations. I mean, in All the Lonely People, there are a couple of moments where even though I'm writing this story and I know it's a work of fiction, there's an emotional truth about what I'm writing that actually even stops me in my tracks, even though I'm the one creating it, which is a very strange thing. But I think that's when you know that your writing is good, is that you're so engaged with your characters that you stop thinking of them as works of fiction, and actually they're people learning and living and growing, and you get to be part of that experience.
Wow. Yeah, I can see that emotional connection. You've grown with them, you've developed with them over time, and now you have to let them go. Just a couple of comments. We have set up a new weekly book club at Karina Lodge. The introduction to your book definitely makes us want to know more, which is great. Atfield House, brilliant. Atfield House, a favorite contemporary writer?
Oh, now there's a question. At the moment, I'm really into psychological thrillers. So it would have to be. I've got all my books behind me.
Just a few.
Oh. Do you know what? I'd have to look on my, because I do a lot of reading now, or a lot of listening to audiobooks on my phone while I'm walking the dog. So I quite often I forget which books I've read or I'm reading, but I couldn't think of anybody offhand. But psychological thrillers, I'm quite into those at the moment, and so yeah, that's the sort of thing that I like to read.
Okie dokie. We've got quite more questions are coming through, and good questions
fantastic.
Too. I just go over to one of the questions very early on, and I think you answered it, but you might want to clarify, is when starting a story, do you start at the beginning, middle, or end?
Well, I suppose it depends. It's entirely you. It's entirely up to you. I mean, I write chronologically, so I write from beginning to end. And I think the reason I do that is that I know of I know of writers who they will write their favorite scenes, and some people even write the endings first and then go back and I always think it makes me feel ill when they talk about it, because I just think to myself, well, you've got to pace yourself. I always feel like you have to pace yourself. I always feel like if I want to get to those good bits, but I think you have to put in the hard work of setting up your characters and doing everything. Otherwise, you might get to the stage where you write the bits that you really want, and then you kind of do the bits that you're not that interested in, and then the reader might be able to tell that actually you're not here's a bit where they were interested, here's a bit where they were a little bit iffy. But it all depends on what's, you know, what works for you, really. I mean, this is one of the wonderful things about being an author, is that you get to be completely in control. And so whatever works for you, you know, one of the, you know, you can learn, you know, one of the best teaching methods you can have for becoming an author is to read a lot. Because the more books you read, the more, you know, you don't really notice it, but you actually you're taking in a lot, to do with structure, to do with pacing, and you know, and that can really feed into your own writing. So, you know, again, if you really want to read, I would say, if you really want to write, I'd say read lots of books, read varied, and think about what the author is doing as you're reading the book. Think, okay, why they started it here, why are they doing there, how have they introduced these characters, what, you know, and especially once you've read the book, maybe go back and think, okay, what clues didn't notice, or what things have they put in there that became more relevant later in the story.
That's really good advice, to dissect it afterwards once you've got the story, like how it all works out. That was from Florence Court, so thank you, Florence Court. This kind of leads into another, from what you just said, another question that we've had. Is the best part of writing a book seeing it in the bookshop, or is it in knowing you are a professional writer? And that was from Lee Brown at Ritson Lodge, who's an aspiring writer who's never finished writing his book. And then he's carried on and said, what works better, naive enthusiasm or technical expertise of words? Again, from Lee. So should we start with the
naive enthusiasm every single time. Just write the book. Don't worry about anybody else. Don't worry about audience. Don't worry about readers. Write a book. Write it. Get it done. That's the first thing. What was the second part of the question? What was the
is the best part of writing a book seeing it in the bookshop, or is it knowing you are a professional writer?
I think the best part of it is, I think the best part for me is having it done. There's nothing quite like having written a novel, because that's my work done for the year. It's just like, yes, I've done it. I've earned my money. But I mean, the first time I saw a book with my name on the shelf was in a shop was amazing, but it wasn't quite as amazing as seeing somebody read it. I was on my legendary girlfriend had just come out, and I was on a train going from London back to Birmingham, and everyone is getting out their newspapers and looking at their phones or whatever, probably before phones actually. And I looked across the aisle, and there was a young woman reading my debut novel, My Legendary Girlfriend. And I'd never seen anybody reading my book, because friends had said, oh, I saw someone buying it, or I'd never seen somebody actually reading it in the wild. And not only was she reading it, she was reading like the last 30 pages. So I couldn't take my eyes off her. I was, and you know, a few times she laughed and thought, well, that's good, it's meant to be funny. And then a few times she pulled her face, I thought, perhaps not so good. And then, this is no word of a lie, she got to the end of the book, she burst into tears. And I thought to myself, oh, I've got to say something. But then I just thought, how weird would it be to be reading a book and then just have the author appear out of nowhere to say, hello, I'm Agatha Christie, or and so I thought to myself, oh, I've got to, but it's such an opportunity, I've got to say something. So and you've got to remember, I'm on a packed train. So I remember just really self-conscious, just like, oh, look, and everyone's going to look at me as soon as I say anything. I just said, look, excuse me. I stood up, excuse me. I couldn't help noticing you're reading this novel. I'm Mike Gayle. And she looked at the back of the book. She looked at me. She went, "You're Mike Gayle." I went, "Yes." I mean, it's amazing conversation. And she was telling me all sorts of things about her life. But the really interesting thing was, years later, I was on Twitter, and somebody had mentioned my name, and it was a question of it was responses to people who have met their authors and what it was like meeting an author. And it was this woman telling this story of meeting me 20 years ago on a train, and it was really lovely. So we had a little reunion. So yes, I think knowing, there's nothing quite like knowing that somebody's enjoyed something that you've done. That I think that really means a lot, because it's a big thing to kind of to read a book. It takes, it's not like watching a film. It's going to take you a couple of hours. It's going to take you a day, 2 days, a week, 3 weeks. And it's quite a different thing. It's quite when you spend a lot of time with it, when you read a book, you're actually spending a lot of time with the author in their world, as it were. So it's a really lovely thing when somebody says, I really enjoyed spending time in that world with that author or with those characters, and thank you for creating that world. So yeah,
I think that's wonderful. What a wonderful experience. Imagine if you were on a train reading a book and then the author comes over to you and says, hey. I think that's amazing. A great opportunity to digest everything that you've just taken in as well, if I was the reader at that point. We've got loads of comments coming through, guys. So one is from Bridie Friston, who's talking for her resident Barbara. Barbara's written her own book, which is an autobiography which made money for charity, and she'd like to write another one, but it is currently paralyzed her. So she's taking her time. She would like to use IT to write a sequel, which is about living and accepting life in a nursing home and enjoying it. So that's the shout out to Barbara over there.
Please do that. Carry on. Definitely do it.
Definitely do it. And Claudia has said we want a bit of a shout out for her resident June at Oak Grange Care Home. She has written a book of poems and would love for Mike to send her a greeting or a well done, please.
Well done on your book of poems. Absolutely. I am the biggest fan of anybody who completes stuff and gets stuff done, and it's just exciting, and I think you should really celebrate the fact that you've done this thing, and congratulations. So well done.
Well done, June. So that from all of us. And we had a question from Mallard Court. Are there any special locations that inspire you?
Well, it's a good question. I don't tend to. I work here in my office, so it's just full of books, and I suppose there's a lot of inspiration in the books. I suppose for a little while pre-pandemic, I used to write in a cafe, and I found that quite inspiring. Mainly because I had noise cancelling headphones on, so it felt like I could see people, but they couldn't interrupt me, or interrupt my flow. I suppose, in terms of places, I tend to set my books, they tend to be contemporary, and most of them tend to be set in the UK, but every now and again I might set a book in a place that I've never been to. So I once set a book in Crete, and so I had to go out to Crete, and so that was quite inspiring to actually do a little bit of research in Crete. And obviously after that I wanted to set one in the Bahamas, but it never quite happened. But yeah, places can be really inspiring, I think. But it's all, it all comes down to the story of what the story needs in terms of location. Yeah.
Brilliant. More questions on Zoom. I don't know if if you spotted any you want to talk about.
There's one I saw that was about how does your family deal with you being so busy?
They're fine. I think they find it. It's funny. My daughter was telling me a story of she was in the school library, and one of my books were on the shelves, and her mates were talking, and the librarian must have overheard, and my daughter said, "Oh, Elliot, said, oh, don't be silly. That's not your dad." And my daughter had to say, "Yes, it is. It's my dad." And she was going, "No, it isn't." And she said, "Yes, it is. Yes, it is." And took out a photo, showed her a picture of me with her, and yes, and the back of the book, and she was completely gobsmacked, because I suppose it's being an author. You don't meet that many authors, I suppose. So it is a little bit of a shock or a surprise when. So my kids are quite used to it. They know that this is my job, and but I do. it's hard to know what they really make of it. I mean, I think they live with it and kind of go, that's what my dad does. But I think everybody thinks what their parents do is quite boring, really. So who knows whether they'll be writers one day.
And then there's one that says, which one of Mike's books would he like to be turned into a movie, and why?
Oh, well, at the moment, so there are things called options which TV companies take out. So they basically take out an option on your book, which means that they reserve the right to try and turn it into a TV film, a TV series, or a film. So at the moment, All the Lonely People has just been optioned, and they want to turn that into a TV series. And my previous book, Half a World Away, has also been optioned by a TV company, and the book before that as well, The Man I Think I Know, has also been optioned by a TV company. So hopefully one of those three will happen. But I'm just, for me, they always ask me if I would like to write the script, and I always say no, because for me, it's I love books, and that's the story I want to tell. And once I've done that, I feel that's my storytelling done. And I quite like the idea of somebody bringing something else to one of my stories. So I remember meeting the script writer for Half a World Away, and it was really lovely to kind of see how they saw the story and how they saw it developing, but also taking something that was a sentence in the book actually became sorry something in the book that was just a sentence. When they fleshed it out, they actually became almost like an episode of the TV series. And it's just they've got a different way of thinking, which I think I'm really impressed by. So I'm happy. I'm happy either way. So I any of them can become a TV series. I'm happy.
Well, good luck, Mike. That's really exciting. Up to 3 there. There's potential.
Yes, at the moment. Yes,
amazing. Oh well, we'll keep our eyes peeled for that one. I have a question here from Mary at Mortain Place. She'd like to know if your books attract any particular readership, or indeed do you aim at a certain audience?
Well, it's interesting. I have had letters from teenagers, and I've had letters from people in their 90s. It's a real. I think a lot of authors always imagine that they sort of know what their readers look like, and the truth is you don't. It's and that's a really lovely thing, I think. That whether it doesn't really matter how old you are, you can kind of connect to these characters, or enjoy the story, or remember how things were for you, or think about how things might be for you in the future. So it's a strange one, but I don't. I ever since I got a letter from a message from somebody in the 90s, it just made me think, I have no idea who's reading my books, and that's lovely and that's great. I just want people to enjoy stories, and I think the more open-minded you are, the more open to, I think people can kind of get themselves stuck in boxes saying I only read this sort of thing and I only read that sort of thing. And so what's really lovely is when people try something that they might not think they necessarily like, or might not read something that they think might not even be aimed at them, and actually find that they really enjoy it. That's the glory of books, I think, is that there's so much that you can really get from it. It's funny, we talk about marketing all the times in books, things like that, and everything seems to be geared towards young people and people, the kind of youth pound or dollar or whatever you want to call it. But I think people enjoy all sorts of books. People at any age can enjoy any sort of book, and I think that's the wonder of it, really.
Well, I think that's wonderful. I think, yeah, don't put yourself in a box, open to all, everybody
Yes.
can enjoy. And on that note, Claudia has just said, who is the lady that you just thanked, and well done for the poems. We agreed to buy his book, and we're all having a reading club to discuss all about it. So
Fantastic. Well, I hope you
open to
enjoy it.
all.
Happy reading.
We've
Um,
got, sorry, go Liz.
Just a couple. I think we've got one more question, which I can lead to you, which I think is the last one that you've spotted. Just before we go into that, though, Residence Del Doyle in I can't see the home has had many books published, and he writes
Oh,
quite gruesome Western novels. That was
Ooh.
Carolyn writing that. So we've got some writers with us here, and also a lady at Cherry Blossom Manor who's wrote 3 books about yoga. So,
oh wow!
you know.
Congratulations on those things.
And we've got a question from Wimbledon Beaumont saying, Mike, do you have any input on the covers of your book?
Again, covers are really interesting. They are essentially marketing tools. So we have meetings after meetings after meetings about covers, and one of the things I learned very, very quickly is that of all the people in the meeting, I am the least important person when it comes to the cover. It really is all about, because they want to get the books into as wide as many places as possible. So they want to get them into Tesco's, into Sainsbury's, into things. So it tends to be driven very much by the cover. It tends to be so you'll get trends with covers as well. So sometimes you'll get cartoon covers were all a trend for a while, and then they went quite graphic after that. And then sometimes you get bright colors like this, and then you might get muted gray covers. It's a marketing tool. So I've learned along the way not to worry too much about the cover, because it's the content that matters really for me. But you'd be surprised how many hours can be spent talking about covers, and they'll talk about the fonts. You've got the little plugs from people, so those are really important as well. People will spend hours trying to, a cell line. So the one for All the Lonely People is, can Hubert Bird find the place where he belongs? But that was taking somebody hours just to kind of, even the size of my name, all of it, even the diagram as well. This you won't be able to see it on here, but it's really clever. And you might not even notice when you pick up a book. You might just go, "Oh, that looks nice," and you pick it up. But actually, so many of the details on this book, from the hats through to the telephone, through to the shoes on the spine, and these are all details from the book. It's so clever. A lot of thought goes into covers. And I try not to worry about it too much. I think, generally speaking, I love all of my covers. And I know I'm quite fortunate in that regard. But I tend to leave it to the people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, if you're not too worried about it, let the experts take over. I've got a personal question. Well, not a personal question, but I had a question. I'm going to throw at you.
I wasn't I going to be uncool.
It was around the names of your book. So All the Lonely People, which I'm sure is a Beatles lyric potentially,
That's right, yes.
and Half the World Away, is that one of them?
Oasis?
That's an REM song.
Is that a purposeful choice, or is that just a
yeah, well, I like music, and so it wasn't something I did consciously, but although My Legendary Girlfriend was also the title of a song by the band Pulp, it's just something that I've got in the habit of. I don't do it. I think I'm trying to think. There have been times when I haven't done it, but every now and again I do it.
Yeah. If it works and it links, why not?
Yeah.
I think we just one more. I think, Fiona, which is on YouTube at the moment. What was your first book that you read that touched you? And that's from Linden House.
Ooh, I think I remember reading Wuthering Heights and just being completely blown away by it. And I must have read that when I was about 16, 17. Just absolutely adored it. Even now, I can quote huge chunks of it, and often do. It's Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte is probably the one that probably emotionally, but the one that made me laugh, the one that probably I'd go to time and time again is The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole by Sue Townsend. That's one of my all-time favorite books. It's very, very funny, and even now, just thinking about particular moments of it just really make me smile. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we've come to the end of the questions, and we've got lots of people saying thank you. And obviously, you've already heard that some of our homes are going to actually buy the book and use it as a book club.
Fantastic. So, thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent. So, guys, get your comments in now, just so we can give them to Mike to say thank you for being part of this event today. Mike, what's your next step then? What's after The Lonely People? What's happening?
So, I am working on a novel, hopefully to come out next summer. We haven't got a title for it yet. I'll just have to, maybe I'll look through all my albums or Spotify lists. But yes, so that's the plan. And what else am I doing? Yes, I think that's it. Mainly, I'm just trying to get this book done. I've been working on it for quite a while now, so it needs to kind of draw things to an end.
Fair enough. Brilliant. Anything from you, Fiona?
No, just good luck with it, Mike. It's been lovely.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's been lovely chatting to you, and massive thank you from all of our homes, everybody at Barchester, for your time. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we'll end the webinar here.
And I'm reading the book and I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
And we'll get the comments over to you, Mike, so you can see what people are saying. There's quite a few coming through, so you can have some feedback. But thank you so much for being part of this event, the first of a reading and a Q&A with an author, which I think has been fantastic, and given lots of people tips on what to do if they are aspiring writers as well, so which is great news. And thank you everybody for attending, and have a good rest of your day. So take care, everyone.